Hello, I'm George Liston, CA. Welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. One of the most fascinating aspects of foreign policy is the way in which a nation blends its own history and experiences into a realistic response to current affairs. Consider the example of Germany. There is strong and growing evidence that this historically powerful nation is using a modern interpretation of history, international responsibility, and its civilian identity to shape its 21st century approach to foreign policy. This new consensus and the policies that result suggest that Germany will play a more active role in confronting the major international challenges of our time, not only in Europe, but around the world. My guest is Dettke, a current fellow of the Woodrow Wilson Center. Dieter, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dieter, you're at work on a book we all look forward to on this very exciting topic of Germany and its foreign policies in the 21st century. To start our conversation, I'd like to quote another author, just to get your reaction as a way of getting started. In a very interesting article that I read recently in the Washington Quarterly, Regina Karp offered this observation, and I quote, "For the first time in 60 years, Germany is an active and independent global player again." She adds, "This new unified German foreign policy has emerged based on its own unique experiences, interests, and views." Now, as you work on the grand strategy, Dieter, is this the kind of view you also support?
In principle, yes. We have seen, of course, an evolution of German foreign policy since unification in particular. But Germany began, of course, to develop for understandable reasons, of a civilian power paradigm, never to use force, never war again. And that was understandable based on our history of being responsible for the Holocaust, being responsible for the destruction of Europe. And we had to rebuild Europe from the beginning. And one of the most important, almost a dogma, was never war again. And then, of course, we were faced with issues like Kosovo, and we found out that you can become guilty by using force, as we did in the past, and you can become guilty by not intervening.
This is
if there is a Holocaust in the making, and if there is genocide, and that's what we have seen, of course, in the Balkans.
Well, this is a very helpful answer. You're telling me, first of all, that this German foreign policy we see today is an evolutionary process.
Right.
It's been a response in which Germany has faced its history and made its own decisions. And one of the most important emphases is on this question of the use of force. And Dieter, does that mean that, well, it must mean several things, but one in particular, that Germany is very restrained in this notion of the use of force and very emphatic in the sense of promoting multilateral responses to things around the world?
Absolutely. Multilateralism was our dogma too. Never to act alone and always act in concert with other nations, on the European level in particular, but also in NATO and in the United Nations. You still have a public opinion in Germany today that supports United Nations decisions. And we have a great support for anything the United Nations does, and we try to be very faithful to these decisions. Now, there are some issues where even that strong commitment to multilateralism came into question, and that was over the war in Iraq.
I want to get, that's exactly the point I wanted us to come to.
Yes.
Because this German emphasis on multilateralism and the connectivity, if you will, of nations acting is, of course, a very powerful point. But Germany did refuse to support the American position on Iraq, to join in the invasion, quite definitely. Walk us through that, Dieter. Why was that decision taken? What does it tell us about German foreign policy today?
Well, that decision to oppose the war in Iraq is a very complex process. The Schröder-Fischer government, Red-Wing coalition, very strong pacifist tradition, was faced with a situation that their own party, the German public, was very much opposed to the use of force. They supported the war in Kosovo. They supported the use of force in Afghanistan, of course, in the war on terror. But in the case of Iraq, the public opinion in Germany and in Europe altogether
Exactly.
totally swung around. It was seen as a risky move. It was seen as something that would divert the alliance and Germany and Europe and the United States from focusing on the war on terror.
Right.
And you might remember one important scene, and it was in early 2003, before the war. The war started in March, when Joschka Fischer, the German foreign minister, stood in front of an audience, and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld had just spoken, and he made the case for war in Iraq because he saw no other way out. And Fischer told him, "I am not convinced."
Yeah.
And the reason to say that is, well, shows first a high degree of independence of Germany's decision making. It was not anymore as deferential as it used to be, and all of a sudden, you know, this new generation that was in charge of German politics since '98,
Right.
did try to, you know, forge their own foreign policy and decision making.
You know, that's very interesting, because on that very point, one of the expressions I've heard from my own German friends at that time was that Germany was very interested in making its position known as not a follower, but a partner. That would be, and in that sense, is it, should we take that as Germany interested in kind of a new definition of its partnership with this country, with America?
Yes, it was interesting that after all this happened, Schröder told, and he says it in his memoirs very clearly, that our participation in Kosovo and in Afghanistan, of course, in the war on terror, made us free to say no to the war in Iraq. And that's an important statement, an interesting statement too, that says, yes, we are willing to live up to our greater responsibility in international affairs. As you remember, George, Germany used to be an economic giant, but a political dwarf.
Exactly.
And now this new generation wanted to forge its own position. They wanted to take on more responsibility, but it shouldn't mean that Germany had to be part in every war.
Yeah.
And would live up still to its commitment to A, multilateralism, and B, to the careful and civilian use of our power.
Exactly. Now, what we're talking about here, and thanks to you very eloquently, began with the Schroeder's declaration under Schroeder's government. This same spirit, I take it, continues under Angela Merkel. And if that is so, and I almost suspect it is it a consensus among German political parties of almost any background that this is the way we're going to present ourselves to the world? In other words, there could be differences in style, emphasis here and there, but that the basic thrust of Germany's role in the world will be like this.
Part of it, George, is going to continue. Yes, a certain degree or greater degree of independence is there, and Ms. Merkel will try to represent that too. What's changing, Elizabeth, is something else, and that is, whereas during the Schröder era, you could see that Germany was putting the emphasis on Europe first. Angela Merkel is trying to get back to a NATO-first strategy. And I think that's a very important distinction because, as you can see, threats are going to continue. We are, Europe and the United States, both faced with a challenge by radical Islamic forces. And that is a challenge of the West, of the whole West. Yeah. And for that, it is still very important, and I'm glad the Chancellor, the new Chancellor, Angela Merkel, is putting the emphasis on that aspect, that the first part of our multilateral consultation should be with NATO.
This is interesting, Dieter, and I'm sure, absolutely certain that you are correct in this. Is there a further complication, though? Because it seems to me she, in fact, her government is putting that emphasis on NATO.
Right.
But isn't Germany also interested in cultivating its partnerships with Russia and China at the same time?
Correct.
I mean, beyond the EU, beyond the NATO relationship, strengthening those.
And this, what you just mentioned, is there. The emphasis on our bilateral relationships with Russia, with China, and with the United States. So Germany is a good European partner, no doubt about it. And Europe will be the basis of our foreign policy, also in the future. But of course, Germany is a global economic player. And we have strong economic interests in and with China. Russia is a very special case for several reasons. But there's one that's particularly important, and that's energy. In order to secure German energy, our imports from Russia, 70% of our imports from Russia are energy imports. And that creates a very special relationship, as you have seen in this Baltic Sea pipeline, a gas pipeline that created so much controversy, particularly in Poland and the Baltic states. Germany is seeking its own individual access to energy. It didn't go well over in Poland and in the Baltic states. And I think we have to diversify that situation. We shouldn't become dependent on Russia's energy supplies. That's very important. And Germany is working on that.
Sounds like a nation that is resolved to have a foreign policy that's commensurate with its economic power for the first time, to really step up and take that role in its fullest possible.
Yes. To take up what we said before, the economic giant and the political dwarf, I think Germany is trying to adjust its political role to a larger field, and it sees it has global interest and wants to follow and seek to advance these global interests by a great power bilateral relationship. Not everything can be done on a European level. And by the way, including German-American relations too. Europe is fine. We have a strong relationship between the European Union and the United States. But we also want to make sure that Germany can have a profound and deep relationship with the bilateral relationship with the United States. And not everything has to go through Europe. It shouldn't be only mediated interests of Germany. It should be an immediate, direct relationship, bilateral relationship between Germany and the United States. And that's going to be better in spite of the war in Iraq.
Insofar as Europe, per se, is concerned, what's the German position on the EU, not just confining ourselves to the EU, and its growth, and it grows ever larger and ever deeper, and its complexity?
We just have the presidency of the European Union. It's a rotating presidency, and Germany tries to implement a huge program with big items, big issues, climate change, a new Middle East initiative, economic reform, structural reform, a cooperation agreement with Russia, a new one. The old one runs out, and Germany tries to forge a close relationship with Russia. We want to keep Russia in the West, and what we're witnessing, of course, right now is that Russia is doing a lot to alienate itself from the West by its critique of the ballistic missile defense, threatening to cancel the INF treaty.
Would Germany support the American position on that? On
missile defense?
As it's proposed right now by the Bush administration.
There is an enormous debate taking place right now about missile defense, whether we do need it or not, whether it's feasible. The general public seems to be skeptical whether that's going to work or not. The Chancellor has taken the position that this is something NATO should decide, but Germany has a hard time to engage fully in a deployment as of now. I think what Germany really needs is a realistic debate about the feasibility of missile defense. And then, as a non-nuclear country, I think Germany should have a basic interest in looking into this. I think if one can provide protection against missile attacks, any government, any democracy has an obligation to look into it for the protection of their citizens. And we'll see the debate moving in a more realistic position. Right now, the critique is stronger than the support.
To continue this line of questioning and move it into the use of force issues that you alluded to at the outset of our conversation, I thought very eloquently in reference to Germany's own history. peacekeeping, nation building. Germany, as you pointed out, is already at this moment active in Afghanistan,
Right.
and the war on terror. What's going to be, will we see more of this kind of thing, and what will be the kind of criteria used? Because Germany's use of force obviously has to be with a lot of forethought, where it might, for example, issues like third world issues like genocide in Darfur and
Yes.
such. Is the Germany of today more predisposed to act?
Absolutely. In the case of Darfur, the German Bundestag just decided to provide a small military contingent to help in Darfur. We know, of course, that military is one element to stop violence, and we should use it. And I think Germany realizes that we have to use force in order to stop that type of violence. But we know, of course, too, that the issue is very profound and needs political management, needs economic help, and needs other measures too. So you cannot use all the problems that exist with military force.
Right.
But in the case of genocide and these terrible acts of violence that we see, Germany is willing to do that and put in its share according to its own possibilities and help. So yes, in Darfur we see the Germans made up their mind and said we have to do that, we have to try.
One of the things that I find most fascinating, Dieter, and it goes in line with this, transforming the economic giant and the political dwarf into a figure of equal size, put it that way,
Right.
is the interest that I've heard expressed on the part of Germany in becoming a full member of the Security Council. Now, I would love to get an insider's view on just the seriousness and the depth of intent behind that, and if that were to happen, what it might represent for the United Nations and the world.
Yeah, it's going to be a very difficult question. No doubt Germany wants to be a member of this UN Security Council. Chancellor Kohl started the debate already. Chancellor Schröder pushed it forward. And we have seen that it failed. The attempt failed because, as I see it, the Security Council is made up by 15 altogether. You have 5 veto powers. And it's a very delicate structure. And it's also a very delicate structure geographically. Germany, wants to be a member, but you have to ask the question, what about Japan? Of course, Japan should also be part of the Security Council for several reasons. Japan is in a very similar position than Germany is. It's a big country. It makes an enormous financial contribution to the United Nations operations, peacekeeping, and so on. Germany does too. I think we are the 3rd largest payer into the UN system. We support the UN idea. And we would like to be a good member of the UN Security Council. But it would, of course, increase the weight of Europe to a point where it becomes a little bit unbalanced.
This is true.
You have 2 European powers already, France and Great Britain. You have Russia, you have China, the only country from Asia,
right.
and we see India, we see Japan. Well, we have to see an African country.
This is the thing. I find this fascinating, and I don't know. We can't resolve it here, obviously, talking about it. But it strikes me, Dieter, just as someone who observes this, that a Security Council reflects more of the 21st century's power realities. Might be interesting. Maybe Germany and Japan on the one hand, perhaps Brazil and India on the other. I mean, that kind of thing at some point might be.
Well, if you would go for balance, and I think one has to, geographical balance too, and the importance of powers and their potential contribution, then you would have to look at Japan, at India. You would have to look at South America, Brazil, and maybe another. And you would have to look at Africa, South Africa, or another African country. But it is really hard even to find a regional consensus who in Africa should be the member in the UN Security Council.
Well,
if there's a chance.
True.
The same, I'm pretty sure, is going to come up in Latin America.
I think you're absolutely right about that. But since we're doing so well on this business of predicting how these things will go, let me ask you another membership question closer to home and concerning Germany very directly. And that's the question of Turkey's accession to the European Union. Let me pose it as a 2-pronged two-pronged question, if I may, Dieter.
Okay.
Because I know Germany has a very large Turkish-born population domestically. And to what extent the integration of that population, particularly the young portion of it, is a major domestic concern of Germany's, and then the added question of what Turkey might mean.
Yeah, well, as you remember, I'm sure, Chancellor Kohl was against the entry and the accession of Turkey to the European community. And the Red-Green Coalition, Chancellor Schröder, turned it around. Not so much, I believe, for domestic reasons, to somehow better integrate the Turkish minority in Germany. We have made progress in that respect, but this is a larger question. That's a security question. It's important to have Turkey as a democratic Islamic state in the European Union to be a bridge between the West and Islam. That's the important thing. That's the strategic decision we have to make. Turkey has made enormous progress in fulfilling all the criteria for European membership. So I'm pretty sure it will happen. We see now a very difficult phase in the negotiations because it is, after all, not easy to integrate an almost, 70 million people. Turkey will become by population, the largest member of the European Union, bigger than Germany, potentially. I mean, if population growth continue as is, you'll have Turkey as the largest member. And that is a little difficult culturally for many Europeans to accept, that an Islamic country is the largest country in the European Union. But I think we have to do it for these larger strategic reasons. And also, I mean, you mentioned the Turkish minority in Germany. Isn't it strange if we would say no to Turkey, but we try everything to integrate our Turkish minority in Germany? And we want to continue to do that. And I think it is much better to have Turkey inside, although it will be difficult. High unemployment in Turkey. You know, there have to be a certain level of economic development in order to make Turkey a full and active member of the European Union.
Well, quite frankly, I'm very supportive of what you've just said. I'll have to be very blunt about it because it seems to me it would be hypocrisy to integrate one population and not try to integrate its homeland, so to speak. And you mentioned something at the outset, Dieter, as kind of the European view of the crisis affecting the future of the West as being the crisis, the challenge posed to liberal democracy by extreme fundamentalism, largely Islamic. And it seems to me that this is one way of coping with, or trying to cope with that.
This is one way, but the other important way is that Europe and the United States have to find a new consensus in spite of Iraq. That's essential, because if you consider a West that would be split, you would see that we would still, both societies in Europe and in the United States, be targets of extremist Islamism. And we have to play a positive role. It is not a West that is united against Islam. That's not the idea. It should be a dialogue. That should be our supreme objective here. But if you would separate Europe and the United States, we would weaken democracy in the future. That's key, that we keep up our potential in order to support the forces worldwide, including within Islamic countries. The forces of pluralism, of openness, not by the use of force, to be blunt and open. That doesn't pay, that doesn't promote democracy. But the constant dialogue, the interaction, and the involvement, that's essential, and here we need Europe and the United States on one side and not opposing each other. And that's why I am so baffled about these anti-American tendencies in Europe. One should be careful with the word anti-Americanism, because not every critique of the U.S. policy is anti-Americanism. You know, we live in a free society. You have people here who oppose George Bush, and one has to have that openness in our own societies and understand our dialogue as a democratic one, as a pluralistic one. And you have to accept these forces that, you know, compete with each other.
I think this is quite frankly, I just have to jump in because I think
Yes.
I think you're on target. You're absolutely right that this, as I call it, transatlantic dialogue or partnership, has to be preserved.
Right.
But as I listen to you, Dieter, and throughout our conversation, and think of what Germany how Germany has changed and accomplished, and what Germany has accomplished, I'm wondering if to continue this transatlantic dialogue between America and Europe, should the terms of emphasis perhaps be somewhat different? And let me be sort of, I hope, precise on this. It seems to me that the German emphasis is on multilateralism and on partnership and on an equality of views, and not any one party imposing, as we say here, my way or the highway on it.
Right.
Is that kind of thing going to be essential too?
Yes, it has to be an equal partnership. That's true. We have to, feel and we have to practice equality. We accept the other as a full partner, and treat him like a full partner. That's essential. There we could use a little bit of improvement in true consultations. And not pro forma consultations, in the true use of NATO and the multilateral institution that we need. Also, in order to pool our military capabilities for peacekeeping and other activities. Wars are short. Peacekeeping and stability building is a long and difficult and cumbersome process, and it takes a lot of effort, political, economic, and otherwise. That's what we need to strengthen.
Dieter, those are words of wisdom. I'm delighted that you came, and you know what? I'm going to invite you back right now, or when the book is finished, we talk about that book. But talking to you about anything is, I think, instructive.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue is also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching this week. And Dieter, thank you. That was a marvelous
Yeah,
book, wasn't it?
great.